Hello, welcome to lesson 13.6A. I've entitled this video F.D.R. This video is going to cover pages 821 to 823. Roosevelt's New Deal. By the time of the presidential election of 1932, any optimism about a quick end to the economic downturn had melted away. The unemployment rate continued to climb, banks were failing, and Americans demanded action. Franklin Roosevelt promised bold new policies to beat back the Great Depression. Question number 1. 3 reasons why Hoover's chances of winning re-election did not look very likely. Number 1, the unemployment rate continued to go up. Number 2, banks were failing. And number 3, Americans wanted action. Roosevelt becomes president. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, known as F.D.R., came from a wealthy, influential family. He attended Harvard University and Columbia Law School. In 1905, he married a distant cousin, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt. Question number 2, describe FDR's upbringing, including his family and his educational experience. Well, he came from a wealthy, influential family, so in a way, he had all the ability to become a very powerful person in American politics. He also attended Harvard, which is a very prestigious school, and he went to Columbia Law School, which once again is very prestigious. Number 3, who did FDR marry in 1905? He married his distant cousin, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, known as Eleanor Roosevelt. They were 5th cousins, and just to show you this chart, because sometimes people are like, oh, he married his cousin, that's gross. Well, if you look here, here's how the chart works. So it's way back from here, but as you can see, the family tree branched off, and that's where he was, and this is where Eleanor was, and over here, yes, that is President Teddy Roosevelt. So definitely a very prestigious family indeed. During World War I, Roosevelt served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. In 1920, he was the Democratic candidate for Vice President, but lost in the Harding landslide. Question number 4, what experience did FDR have in World War I? He was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Number 5, what political setback did FDR face in 1920? Well, he was the vice presidential candidate for the Democrats when they got crushed by the Republican Harding in the 1920 election. Physical challenges. Then, in the summer of 1921, Roosevelt was stricken with a severe case of polio, which left his legs paralyzed. He spent years building up his strength. Due to his illness, FDR founded the National Foundation for Infantile Paralysis, more commonly known as the March of Dimes. The original purpose of the foundation was to raise money for polio research and to care for those suffering from the disease. And eventually, that research led to a polio vaccine. What is interesting is this Wikipedia clip that I took, and that is that some believe that maybe FDR did not have polio, but it could have been GBS, or Guillain-Barré syndrome. They did a research into what his symptoms were, and they found that it's actually more likely he had GBS than polio, but the history books at this case say that it is polio. Whichever it was, GBS or polio, it was a debilitating disease that really affected the ability for him to use his legs. Which is question number 6. What physical attack did FDR face in the summer of 1921? He faced polio or GBS. Either way, it left his legs paralyzed. In time, Roosevelt returned to public life. In 1928, he won election as governor of New York. Then in 1932, the Democrats made him their presidential candidate. The Republicans again nominated Herbert Hoover, even though many believed he had little chance of winning after his struggles to cope with the Great Depression and his treatment of the bonus army. So now we can answer question 7. How do you think the setbacks that FDR experienced might have given him the tools needed to be a strong leader during the Great Depression? Well, if you think about it, first he got crushed in an election in 1920, and then he got crushed physically with either polio or GBS. And so here's a man who was given these struggles or these obstacles to overcome. And so when the Great Depression happened, this is a man who had grit. He had understood what it takes to overcome great obstacles. Question 8, what political victory did FDR win in 1928? He was the elected governor of New York. Question number 9, we're not there yet. We'll get that in the next one. Winning the election. Roosevelt set a new tone right from the start. He broke with tradition by flying to the Democratic Convention to accept the nomination in person. Standing before the delegates, he declared, "I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people." Roosevelt did not spell out what he meant by a new deal. Still, he sounded a hopeful note. In campaign speeches, he promised to help the jobless, poor farmers, and the elderly. So question number 9, at the Democratic National Convention, what expression did FDR use that would forever be linked with his presidency? The phrase, New Deal. Question 10, in his campaign speeches, what 3 groups of people did he promise he was going to help? The jobless, poor farmers, and the elderly. Voters responded to Roosevelt's confident manner and personal charm. On Election Day, he won a landslide victory. Democrats also gained many seats in Congress. On Inauguration Day, the new president addressed the American people with optimism. Primary source, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, inaugural address, March 4, 1933. This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive, and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. Notice his use of the word paralyzes there. Who better would know than FDR about that concept? So here we see the election of 1932. FDR crushes Herbert Hoover with the electoral votes and with the states. We saw this in reverse in the 1920s, how the Republicans crushed the Democrats. Well, at this point, Americans wanted change. We see that the popular vote was pretty dominating, although not as severe as the Electoral College vote. How bad was it for Hoover? I always like this story. President Hoover received a telegram urging him to, quote, vote for Roosevelt and make it unanimous. Ouch. Question number 11. What was the outcome of the election in 1932? FDR won in a landslide. Here we see the Electoral College map, just to give you an indication. Notice how popular Hoover was. This was a map that showed the Republican domination of the 1920s. But notice what the Great Depression did to the country. Hoover was only able to win a couple of states in the Northeast. President Roosevelt then issued a call to action. This nation asks for action, and action now, he said. Many Americans welcomed this energetic new president, especially since Hoover's more cautious approach had failed to end the nation's economic crisis. And now we can close out with number 12 and 13. Number 12, what is the famous quote or line from FDR's first inaugural? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And question 13, what tone did FDR take in his inaugural address? He took a positive, upbeat tone of action. And that's what America needed to hear at that time. Well, thank you very much for watching. I don't have a joke about FDR, but I do have a joke that he said about his wife, Eleanor. He had a great sense of humor. When First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was visiting a penitentiary on business, and FDR was told that she was, quote, in prison, he replied, I'm not surprised, but what for? Oh my. Thank you and have a nice day.